Hi there and welcome along to the On the Whistle podcast. I'm your host, Zayn Nabbi, and joining me for this very special edition to wrap up the Women's AFCON, which was history-making, exciting in so many ways, is our man on the ground. Welcome, Alasdair Howorth, our cross-platform reporter, a man who's been very busy over the last few weeks. Ali, it's good to have you with us. I know you are just soaking up the last few days in Rabat, in a wonderful coffee shop where you're just bringing in all the ambience in. How are you doing, sir?
Yeah, apologies for the background noise. The Wi-Fi is at a premium in my apartment, so I've had to come here. But aside from that, doing really well. Kind of enjoyed the tournament and enjoying the fact that I didn't have to rush off immediately as some people had to. I know some people who were at the final that finished at 11. They were doing mix zones until well past 1 o'clock in the morning, and then had to catch a 5 a.m., 4 a.m. flight. So I'm very glad I didn't have to do that.
Absolutely. And, you know, we're so glad you're here. We're recording this podcast on a Tuesday, so South Africa are arriving back in country. There's going to be a parade. There's going to be various celebrations for them. We know that you spoke to the winning coach, Desiree Ellis, after the final. I have to start here with you, Alasdair, as I'm bask in this glory. For those who listen to the podcast regularly, you know we pride ourselves on being Africa's biggest braai. Braaiing is a South African cultural tradition. I myself am South African. If you listen, then you know. If you don't know, now you know. But Alasdair, what I want to know from you, notice what I did there, is find out how Banyana Banyana won this tournament.
I mean, I think Reynald Pedros, the coach of the Moroccan side, said it best. And he said, you know, when asked why his team didn't beat South Africa, why they couldn't beat them in the finals, he said, look, they're the best team. They're a better team than us, and they play the best football. And you know, ultimately, I think that's the reality. You know, Desiree Ellis, who's like you said, I spoke to after the match, and has been generous enough to come onto our podcast before, and is just such a brilliant person. Has put together a great side, and I think they're the definition of being more than the sum of their parts. You know, at times they play some electric football, but they've also over the years have learned how to get the job done, even when they're not playing well. I mean, she referenced a lot post-match in the final the fact that they actually played a lot worse football than they did in 2018 when they made it to the final, completely outplayed Nigeria in the final, and still lost. And so I think that's how they've done it. Is they built this team, they built this incredible community around the squad that she's had the chance to do over the last 6 years. And now they've had the experience of losing. They've had the experience of what it takes to be a winner, and they deserve it so much. They played every single one of the other 3 semifinals. They beat Nigeria, they beat Zambia, and then they beat Morocco. And, I think that just is a testament to how good a side this is. And, they didn't need extra time to do it in any of those matches. Obviously, they rode their luck, particularly in that match against Zambia. But, in the final against Morocco, from start to finish, they were the better side. They thoroughly deserved it. And, they really deserve to be the champions of Africa.
South Africa have had so many near misses in this competition, including when Desiree Ellis played for the national team. How much does it mean for South Africa to finally lift this title?
Yeah, well, I mean, coach is usually one of the most calm and measured people. Every press conference is, we're on to the next game, or heads are focused, whatever. She was like a giddy schoolgirl. It was hilarious, just so excited. And you could just see how much it meant to her. She's been on this pod to tell us about, the struggle she faced as a player, growing up in apartheid South Africa, not even being able to play for the national side until she was in her 30s, losing her job in a factory in Cape Town because her bus from Joburg from a tournament she went to broke down and she missed work. And the whole South African team is like that. You have some of these players, like Janine Van Wyk, who's, I think this was her 8th tournament, Noko Matloyo, the other center back, who, is, I think, over 160 caps for the national side. And so, it means so much to them, and they put so much work into this. Our friend of the pod, Lawrence Poller, was telling me that before the tournament, he was speaking to another friend of the pod, Pitso Mosimane, and Pitso was saying that actually Banyana are now, they're the flagship team of South Africa, because they're the ones who are pushing boundaries. They're the ones who are kind of yeah, well, winning. They're the ones who've done so well over the last few years. And I think you could see how much it meant to them. They put so much work. And there was, so many of them spoke about fate and destiny and, how much that this was their birthright almost to win this tournament. And it meant so much to them. And it was brilliant to see. And I just hope that when they return to South Africa, that they're getting the kind of the hero's welcome that they so thoroughly deserve.
And I want to capture some of that spirit. And I know that you did some mix zone interviews after the final. So right now on the pod, you're going to hear from Banyana Banyana's coach, Desiree Ellis. She guided the team to the WAFCON success. And here's Alasdair's interview with her in the mix zone.
Me, I'm over the moon. We had the objectives. We went way back home in South Africa. And Jermaine said, we want to win it. And I said, well, there's that first match of first. She said, no, if we win it, then we don't worry, we qualify for World Cup, etc. But the players were absolutely magnificent today. I just could feel it. Somebody asked me if I'm okay, and I said, yes, my job is done. It's now up to the players. Also, they said to the players, you might not hear us, so you've got to help each other. But they were so good today. We gave a silly goal away, but they were so good today.
And coach, for you, thinking even back as far as 2000, it's been so long. And you've been the one person who's been through it all, it feels like, for you personally,
I think it's amazing. Our country needed this. Our country needed some good cheer. Our country needed some hope. And for everything that support that they gave us. So it's a big thank you to our sponsor. 2 World Cups, 2 Olympics, and now this. What more could Cecil ask for? To the South African Football Association, thank you. When we were faced with adversity during our COVID situations, they came through for us. And our president was always on hand here to support us. But to the fans back home, to the coaches back home, this is for them.
And coach, I remember you telling us on the podcast about you being fired from your job in a factory because you had to go and play football. How special is it for you now seeing your players, these youngsters? I spoke to Nabbi yesterday, having the opportunities now to play that just didn't exist.
18 years old, and there's so many that have come before. Timing is just right. The timing is just right, The sacrifices that you make, this is the success. I could have done my UEFA B license, I think it was in 2010, but I didn't have a full-time job. I had to pay my car, and I thought if I'm away for 4 months, I lose my car, I lose my house. I sacrificed that, didn't do my UEFA B, I've got a cafe. This
doesn't matter now.
This is the biggest thing and the sweetest thing.
And coach, finally, you've got 1 gold medal. Are we going to see a second one at the World Cup?
Look, first things first, we're going to celebrate as much as we can. We'll get ready, we'll prepare really well. This team has huge potential. Ntimbi wasn't here, Gabriela Salgado wasn't here, many others. So I think the team has huge potential, and now they know what they're capable of. They were so determined and so focused, and when they came out, they said that's not going to deter them. So we'll take it step by step and build up towards it and see what we can do.
Alasdair, you described Desiree as somebody who was incredibly giddy after the final. I mean, fantastic that you got her so soon afterwards. You can certainly hear how excited she was. And for every winner in a final, there's also got to be a loser. So I have to ask you, I mean, what about Morocco? How do they look back at this tournament and getting so far, but also missing out on just winning?
Yeah, I mean, look, losing a final is always going to hurt, and it's going to be difficult, and the team is going to really kind of suffer for a while until they kind of reflect. But when they do reflect, this tournament has been nothing but a success. The team 18 months ago, this team was, on the edges, the fringes of African football. They hadn't qualified for a WAFCON in over 22 years. They were nobodies. 18 months later, they are in the final of the competition. They've broken the record attendance for women's AFCON attendances, not once, but twice. And they played some really good football along the way. I mean, you have to take your hats off to Morocco, because they have shown not just Africa, but the world how to develop women's football, and the answer is just invest. Morocco, as far as I'm aware, is the only country in the world that has two fully professionalized leagues for women's football. They're backed by the federation. They played more friendlies, had more preparation than any other team going into the WAFCON, and they hosted a brilliant tournament. And so, for this Morocco side, having no experience to come through the tournament, beat Nigeria, push South Africa all the way. Yes, they were second best in the final, but they still made it close. There is nothing they can take away from this tournament except for positives. And when you look at the investment they put into the youth sides, creating an under 17s national league, as well as, the structure they have in place, I think myself and most of the journalists who are here would agree that over the next couple of decades, we're probably going to see the Moroccan women's team in the final a lot more often, because they've really put the groundwork in to make themselves a really successful country.
All very good points there, and certainly a wonderful result for the host nation, even though they didn't win the tournament. I have to ask you, looking ahead to the World Cup next year, how will the teams look going into that? We know that this tournament also served as a qualifier for the Women's World Cup that'll take place in the Antipodes. What's your take on that?
I mean, it's always so hard to compare across, continents, isn't it? To see, to judge how these teams will do based off of WAFCON performances. But I think what we have seen is the general level of African football has increased so much. And the teams will not be easy to beat. Morocco and South Africa are both extremely well organized. Nigeria, if they can kind of sort out their internal problems, still have an incredible squad with some fantastic players. And when you look at some of the teams like Nigeria, like South Africa, they came into this tournament missing their best players. Banyana missing Tembi Kgatlana, also been on this podcast, as well as Gabriela Salgado, their best defender. Nigeria missing Asisa Oshoala, and now record-winning Africa's probably best ever footballer. And so, I think they're going to be a lot better when it comes to the World Cup. Morocco and Zambia have shown that they're really well organized and will be a threat. But the reality is, women's football is improved a lot across the world, and we've seen that in the Euros. We've seen the standard of football that has been played there, and it's really, really high. And so I think these teams will, it won't be the walkovers that we've come to sometimes expect when the big sides are playing them. We've seen teams like Nigeria go toe-to-toe with Canada, the Olympic champions. But I think there still is that gap, particularly with Europe now, because we've seen how much football has improved in Europe. And so I think, we also spoke about this a lot at the WAFCON, and there was a big sense of people like, Desiree or others. Even Patrice Motsepe was saying that, he expects an African women's team to win the World Cup before a men's team, because they've shown that they can close that gap much faster than they can in the men's game. But yeah, it's always really hard to judge. But what I'll say is these African teams have shown that they'll prepare. For instance, I don't think any team will come into the World Cup better prepared than Morocco. I wouldn't be surprised if they're playing 6-7 friendlies, playing against the best teams in the world. Nigeria already have friendlies set up with the US and Japan. So the teams are much, much better prepared than they have been in previous World Cups. And I think we'll see that reflected in the way they play in Australia and New Zealand.
Wow, we could see an African team win a World Cup. That would be amazing. As we conclude the pod, the WAFCON's taken place. For all intents and purposes, everyone's very positive about the tournament and about the impact it's had. What are your overall takeaways about the women's game, and what now for it?
I think the biggest takeaway from this tournament, I've said it, pretty much every time I've appeared on anywhere throughout the tournament, is that it's competitive. Gone are the days of Nigeria beating someone 8-0 and 6-0 every time, and gone are the days in which the small teams come just to make up numbers. They expanded the tournament to 12 teams from 8, and there's 4 debutants and 4 other teams who hadn't been in the competition for over a decade, might as well have been debutants. And they showed that they were competitive. Looking at teams like Botswana had a terrible run in terms of the teams they played. They played Nigeria, South Africa, Cameroon, and Morocco. And yet every single game, they were extremely competitive. They narrowly lost all of those games, but they could easily have won. I think that's the biggest thing. I'd say, similar in the men's game, we've seen this kind of rising middle class of African countries who have shown that they can actually compete with the best, and the best teams no longer are in a category of their own. In the women's game, that's Nigeria. They're no longer kind of expected to steamroll everyone. And so I think that's the kind of biggest takeaway is teams are preparing better, teams are investing more. I mean, none more so than Morocco. But the second thing I would say is that, you know, the kind of demand for women's football is there. I mean, yesterday I was speaking with the head of the Moroccan leagues and the president of the Moroccan football leagues, and she said that they had no idea that this many fans would turn up to watch the game. She said, you know, previously women's games would, you know, get maybe 300 or 400 fans. And yet I was there 3 hours before kickoff at the final. I had to get out of my taxi a mile away from the stadium because it was already so congested that I just had to walk. And, you know, 3 hours before the kickoff, the stadium was already full, and there was, you know, another 15, 20,000 plus fans outside the stadium. And so I'd say is there is the demand for women's football. You know, we have this assumption that people don't want to watch women's football. And, you know, we've shown this tournament, it's just not true. You know, there is huge demand for it. And so I think that's probably the most encouraging thing coming out of this AFCON.
And long may that continue, Alasdair. Well, listen, for those of you who are listening out there, please get in touch on our social media accounts, OTW_podcast on Twitter and Instagram, or you can find us on YouTube or Facebook. Just search for the On the Whistle podcast. We love to hear from you. You tell us if you agree with Patrice Motsepe and whether we'll see a women's team win the World Cup before a men's African team. And tell us what you thought about the tournament. Tell us what you thought about the podcast. Tell us if you think that Nigeria were unlucky not to win. Say that sort of goading Nigerian fans, being a South African. We love you, Nigeria. I'm joking. But Alasdair, your work on the ground has been sterling. I hope you've enjoyed your show. Not only has this tournament been history making for the women's game, it also has been for our podcast. This was our first international deployment, and we were so glad to see you there. It would be remiss, even though we're ending the podcast, not to ask you how you've enjoyed it, and also for you to highlight some of the work you've been doing. You've been doing other podcasts, you've been doing big television networks. How have you enjoyed all of that? And for those who might have missed those clips, who have you been doing work for?
Yeah, look, I mean, my first experience of doing a big international tournament, I must say, you know, I'm excited to go home and sleep. I've missed that. Also, to be able to tell what day of the week it is. You know, I still have no idea what day of the week. Is it a weekend? Is it the week? I have no idea. But it's been a lot of hard work, and it's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed it. You know, learned so much, not just about football, not just about the women's game here, but you know, just how the whole system works, how it all goes down. And it's been a joy, to be honest. You know, I've, you know, had some real kind of blessed opportunities to do some work for the BBC, appear on CNN quite a few times. So check those out on my Twitter if you haven't seen them, as well as just writing for lots of various different great publications who are kind of promoting the women's game either in the UK or in the US. And it's, you know, it's been a brilliant experience. You know, the tournament has been very, very well managed. You know, doing my first tournament in the women's game is slightly more pleasant than doing it in the men's, because there isn't just the kind of hordes of thousands of journalists kind of pressing in on you every time you're trying to do a mix zone or anything. And the players are really happy to talk to you. You know, you don't get any Mo Salahs who just walk straight through the mix zone and ignore everyone. You know, even Rizal Ayan, who, you know, scored the goal in the final, but lost obviously with Morocco, she still took, you know, 20, 30 minutes to speak to all the media. And you know, it's just great to see that and great to be a part of that. And I think it's just been a brilliant ride, and been brilliant to do some stuff for On the Whistle.
Absolutely. We're so proud of the work you've done, and we're glad you enjoy that experience. And for those who want to check out his social media accounts, please go. He is on Twitter at Howorth97. That's the digits 9 and 7. At yeah, that's it. You can also email him at ahoworth97@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you've come this far, as we say always, leave a rating, leave a review, post a comment. It certainly helps people find the show, and we love interacting with you. All the best, and Alasdair, safe travels. We'll see you soon in person to give you a hug.